Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the ethics of egoism and self-interest. And there are balloons behind me because I'm in my living room, and yesterday was my daughter's birthday party. So maybe that'll give you something interesting to look at as we keep going. Egoism is basically the theory of acting in one's own self-interest, not just arguing that people do that, but actually arguing that that is also the morally correct thing to do. So we're going to explore this theory today. This PowerPoint is actually comparatively short. I have some supplemental materials for you on Moodle. I have a short video and then a case that I'm going to ask you to look at as well. So one thing that you'll notice about a lot of ethical theories is that they begin with a basic description of human nature. And the reason why we look at that when we talk about ethics is because of this axiom in philosophy: ought implies can. What that means is that when you tell someone that they ought to do something, it has to be within the realm of something they can realistically be expected to do or that they're capable of doing. So it wouldn't make any sense to tell people that they ought to do something that is impossible for them to do. So you wouldn't want to tell people, well, you always ought to get only 2 hours of sleep per night because then you'll be much more productive, because very few people can actually do that and survive. So ethics tells us the ought, and an impossible ought, though, is meaningless. So a moral theory that poses an impossible standard on people would be one that, even if it sounded good, would be meaningless to try to follow. So we have to take human nature into account in order to figure out a plausible moral theory and a plausible ought recommendation for human behavior. So with psychological egoism, we're beginning with the basics of theories about human nature inherent in egoism. What are people really like? This is a descriptive theory, so more of that terminology from last time. This is just the is statement, the fact part of the theory that tries to establish what, for an egoist, basic human nature is all about. So the basic idea here is, for egoists, all human beings are inherently self-interested, and therefore all voluntary acts, everything we do purely voluntarily, is all voluntary acts are done from self-interest. So what that would mean is anything that we do that doesn't serve our own self-interest would be done only if we were forced or coerced in some way to do that. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can never do anything for other people. It just would mean that if you did something for another person, if you were doing that completely freely, you're also getting something out of it yourself. This would also then imply that we are generally inclined to follow our natural tendency to do things for ourselves only. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is the difference between being selfish and being self-interested. When egoists talk about all voluntary acts being done out of self-interest, what they're talking about is something a little different than what we would normally consider as a selfish act. A selfish act is one that sacrifices other people to pursue your own interest. It's usually for short-term gain, and it's usually something that is going to be contrary to your own self-interest. So a great example of a selfish act is something like drunk driving, right? Drunk driving is an act that sacrifices others, for sure, in order to pursue the drunk driver's interest of driving whenever and wherever he feels like. The safety and well-being of others, including himself, that are on the road. It is definitely just for a short-term gain. There's nothing long-term to be gained from drunk driving. And it's actually contrary to the drunk driver's self-interest in order to do this. He may get a DUI, he may get arrested, he may have to pay a fine. There are all kinds of ways in which this is a really bad idea in terms of long-term self-interest. A self-interested act is different than a selfish act. A self-interested act is possible to do while you're also taking others' interests into account. So we don't have this mutually exclusive set of opposites like we have with a selfish act. I can do something that's self-interested that doesn't necessarily sacrifice the interests of other people. Self-interested act is usually thinking about the long term rather than the short term, and it may actually require a short-term sacrifice in order to achieve. So a great example of a self-interested act is going to the dentist. Most people, except for my crazy children who for some reason like it, most people don't like going to the dentist. But it's for your long-term well-being to do that. The reason that you go to the dentist is so you avoid having an even more uncomfortable experience of a rotten tooth or an abscess or something like that. So in that case, you're making a short-term sacrifice of discomfort in order to achieve something that's more in your long-term self-interest. Healthy food choices, exercising are also things in this category. You may have to sacrifice something you want to eat right away. You may have to get up earlier than you want to and sacrifice some sleep in order to exercise. But these are all things that don't sacrifice other people's interests and are definitely in your long-term self-interest. So self-interest is really what we're going for when we talk about egoism and not selfishness. So if all voluntary acts are done out of self-interest, which is the claim that egoists make, then we have to figure out ways in which a person might be coerced to act against their own self-interest. So the most obvious way, and what most people think of when they hear the word coercion, is physical coercion, and that's like what's going on in this picture, right? You hold a gun to someone's head and you're making them an offer they can't refuse. Or if you're talking about a child, right, you might pick them up and make them go with you where you want them to go. Those are all great examples of physical coercion. But when we're talking about adults, most of us aren't usually coerced in this real literal physical way in order to act against our own self-interest. But that doesn't mean we are always acting freely. So laws are a great tool of coercion. With the use of laws, the state imposes punishments or threats of punishments to get people to do what they want them to do. So even though I may immediately want to hurt another person who makes me angry or take something from the store when I want it, knowing that there's a law in place through the threat of punishment coerces me into behaving rightly. Social pressure is another great example of non-physical coercion. There may be some things that we know we're expected to do and that we might be socially ostracized if we didn't do them. There might be some things that we want to do out of our own self-interest that we avoid doing because we know there would be negative social consequences. So one example of this might be if you work in an office or if you're a person who works in an office and there's a collection being taken up for some charity, you really don't want to give, you'd rather use that money yourself for something, but you know that everyone in the office will have a bad opinion of you if you don't give. That's an excellent example of social pressure. So oftentimes we do things that we wouldn't do if it was totally voluntary and freely chosen, but we're not really doing it because we want to do it. We're doing it because the social approval is more important to us in that instance than keeping the money. Emotional manipulation is another non-physical form of coercion, and that's basically where you make someone feel guilty as a way to motivate them to do something. Oh, you'll feel so bad if you don't do this. Sometimes parents do this to children, right? Oh, it makes mommy really sad when you do that. Couples do this to each other. Politicians do it to the electorate. This happens all the time, right? People are going to emotionally manipulate others into doing what they want. And then finally, non-legal rewards and punishments. This is the way we get kids to behave, right? We might get them a treat or a reward for good grades or for cleaning their room, something like that, or punish them for bad behavior. We have a whole gamut of ways in which a person could be coerced into acting against their own self-interest without necessarily being physically forced to do it. So this is going to motivate us to do things that are nice for other people, maybe give to charity, maybe volunteer work. That's something you want to put on your resume if you're a college student, maybe, and you're going to be looking for a job soon. But that we're not necessarily being directly physically coerced to do. So we got to kind of expand our idea of what coercion means. So that's the basics of psychological egoism. And if you want to look a little more or think a little more about that, I know it's an episode of Friends and it's not that highly intellectual, but it does do a nice job of illustrating the difficulty of finding an act that is purely altruistic, that is not self-interested at all, and that is done completely voluntarily. So it's just a funny little portion of an episode, but it does a nice job of illustrating that point of psychological egoism. With ethical egoism, we're moving on to the normative aspect of the theory. That's the ought aspect of the theory. So we know that now we're going to be told what we ought to do, not just what people are like. So keep in mind this vocab from the first day. The good is whatever serves your self-interest in egoism. So that's always what we're aiming for. That's the only thing that is of inherent value. And that means that the right thing to do is whatever helps you achieve that. So we're going to define the right as whatever pursues your own self-interest. That means that sometimes an action like giving to charity might be considered wrong if it's against your self-interest to do that. But that same action in another instance might be considered morally right if it serves your self-interest to do that. Let's say by building up your reputation or making you look like a big shot in front of your friends or something like that. So this is a pretty loose definition of right and wrong. All you have to do is figure out what your self-interest is and whether the proposed action helps you achieve that. So that's why we say the wrong is whatever takes you away from the good, your self-interest. Those are the things you want to avoid doing. So this is kind of a subjective moral theory in the sense that you get to determine what's in your own self-interest, and then you get to determine a course of action that it would be considered morally right that helps you achieve that. So the big question for egoism is whether it would ever be considered morally good to help other people if you're an egoist. Is this a theory that requires us to always do things only for ourselves, or might it actually be in your self-interest to help others? So I've kind of hinted at that a little bit already. I mentioned that you might get to look like a big shot, for example, if you help other people in front of others. But we have a lot of instances where we can try to derive an ulterior motive from a seemingly altruistic act. So I like this illustration. We have an act of kindness in the top example where the guy is helping the frumpy old lady fix her flat tire. And in the same exact act in the second picture, we have a sexy lady, and now it's an act of selfishness. So the idea is that he's expecting to get something out of helping the second person. So when we're thinking about egoism and we're thinking about the possibility of helping others, the idea there would be that as long as helping others also promotes your own self-interest in some way, it's acceptable to do. And it doesn't have to be strangers either. For example, if I was an egoist and I was a parent, I am a parent, I'm not an egoist, but an egoist parent might still be highly motivated to take good care of his or her children on the rationale that they need somebody to take care of them in their old age, on the rationale that they don't want to look bad in front of other people. They might want to have a great reputation as a wonderful parent. Those are all self-interested reasons to do something that seems like it's just a nice thing to do for other people. So an egoist can help others, but it would only be considered morally good if the egoist is getting something out of it and it's furthering his or her own self-interest in some way. So I gave you a little case. It's very short. It's uploaded as a Word document on Moodle about Betty and Uncle Herman. And this is supposed to illustrate the publicity problem or the universalizability problem that the author James Rachels, who wrote the piece on egoism that you should have read for today, talks about. Rachel's critique here is that egoism is a theory that was really best applied only to oneself, and it's something that as an egoist you might actually want to keep secret from other people. So the case of Betty and Uncle Herman illustrates that. It's a case of an older man who has lived his life as an egoist. He's built a vast fortune for himself, and he has this young niece, Betty, who he happens to have mentioned his egoist philosophy to. So we'll see in the case, as you can see in the case, there are some problems that arise for Uncle Herman because he happened to have shared his egoist philosophy with others. The idea that James Rachels is talking about is that if you really want your own interests to be fulfilled at all times, you should never tell other people about egoism because it's best for me as an egoist if everyone else is looking out for me, not themselves. And if I tell them about egoism, they're going to stop trying to be nice to me and everyone else, and they're only going to be serving their own self-interest. So the best world for an egoist would really be one in which that person pursues his or her own self-interest, and that person tells everyone else to be selfless, to be altruistic, to do things for others. Because now the egoist is going to be the recipient of these kind gestures, of other people's niceness, but they're not going to have to return it unless they consider it to be in their self-interest to do so. So what I'd like for you to do with this case is just take a look at it. Think about how it represents the publicity problem inherent in egoism, which is the problem I just described. The idea that it's something that if you were truly an egoist, you might actually want to keep under wraps instead of telling people about. And then, according to Rachels, the author for today, why do moral theories need to be universalizable? In other words, what's so important? Why is it such a problem for a moral theory to say that it's not universalizable? So take a look at that. These are questions, like I said before, if I give you kind of food for thought type questions like this that I'm not providing the answers to, that's a great sign that these are things that might turn up on the midterm or final exam. In this case, it's the midterm. So take a minute to think about these. Think about why it's so important for a moral theory to be universalizable. Relook at that Rachel's reading and see if you can figure that out. If you have any questions about that, again, my office hours are always a great time to do that, or if you want to raise it in the discussion forum if it comes up in response to one of the questions. That's all I have for today. Don't forget to look at those other sources, the video and the case, and I'll see you guys next time.